Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to a very special episode of Films and Stuff. I'm Ethan, joined by the Batman to my Robin, Pete. What's up, Pete? How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Everything is good. The topic of the week, Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny, has dropped. It is in cinemas. We both saw it on the opening night.
That's right.
We are ahead of the curve. So it is just the beginning of the weekend. So literally everybody should be gearing up, getting their tickets to see it this weekend, right? This is the opening weekend worldwide.
That's right. And then by the time this episode drops, you'll all have a reasonable idea of whether you liked it if you saw it or whether you should see it based on what I expect box office numbers are going to be like.
That's right. So if you've seen it, you will be able to follow along in this conversation. If you have not seen it, spoiler alert, we're not going to hold back on any details or plot twists here. So without further ado, the fifth installment of Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny, after a layoff of how many years? When did we see the Crystal Skull?
2008.
Good 15 years, huh?
Been a while.
Shia LaBeouf has gone both to rehab and gotten religion in that time, which shows you how long it's been, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we may as well say it now and sweep it under the rug, as this movie did so quickly, by the way.
Yep.
I mean, Shia LaBeouf's character is used as a very convenient plot device.
Yep.
In the Indiana Jones canon, he is dead.
Mutt is dead. Yeah.
Presumably it was the Vietnam War, but it could be Korean War.
But really, he's a casualty of bad character development in 2008.
Ultimately. Bad character development in 2008, along with, I mean, I don't want to sound judgy, but potentially bad personal life choices in 2008 onwards.
Hollywood has shown us time and time again that despite bad behavior, there is a role for you, unless you're a greaser named Mutt, in which case audiences just don't want to see you again. And therefore, conveniently, the intervening war has knocked him out of this franchise.
Right, exactly.
So, farewell to Mutt. So let's start, as we always do, with the build-up. What was your level of enthusiasm now going into Dial of Destiny?
So again, I was already at an all-time high for enthusiasm because I like Indiana Jones as a franchise. I like Harrison Ford as an actor. I just thought that this would be a great piece of nostalgia, the same way I felt about The Force Awakens when it was first announced, which was to say that it just felt like a comfortable pair of slippers in the sense that you kind of know what to expect with an indie movie, right? There's some elements that are formulaic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in this case. But yeah, in any case, I was excited. And then, of course, when the movie premiered at Cannes, and this is my fault. I shouldn't have fallen for it, as I do every year. And I say this to myself every year, but it's a lesson I never learn.
Never sticks.
But they showcased the movie at Cannes. Everybody gave Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford specifically a standing ovation for like 15 minutes because of course they did. Why wouldn't
it's an
they?
Echo chamber. I mean, that is a conference. If you think about it this way, that is a conference of actors for actors.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Everybody, I mean, we do see this year and year again, right? And it is heartwarming and it is sweet, but we also have to remember this is an echo chamber where by definition, everyone is going to be ultra supportive and, make sure
no matter how good or how bad the film is, they always
are. Right.
I agree. So,
that's right.
And I fell for it because then people were talking about how everyone was in tears and Harrison Ford got his Lifetime Achievement Award or something like that, I think. And so like he was in tears and I was like, my God, if you can make Harrison Ford emotional, that means that there's something to this. And just like we saw with countless other films this year already, you know, especially The Flash. I bought it hook, line, and sinker.
You do.
So, but what about you? What did you think? How was your, not just your excitement levels, but like, you know, I know that I think probably on the scale of excitement, I was probably already slightly higher than you were.
Oh
Not just
yeah.
for this movie, but in general for Indiana Jones.
You were way, way more enthusiastic about Indiana Jones than I was. And that was primarily because I watched Crystal Skull for the first time. I never saw
Okay.
Crystal Skull in 2008. So I watched Crystal Skull for the first time. And that really put a rancid taste in my mouth.
Right.
Had we ended after The Last Crusade, I would have been, probably quite enthusiastic for this. The fact that Crystal Skull came, we saw Shia LaBeouf, who at the time I really loved because he was, at the height of his Transformers fame. We saw him totally miscast and misnamed as Indy's long lost son that he never knew he had, a greaser named Mutt. We saw the nuclear nonsense, and then we saw the alien craziness. I have to say, I was unenthusiastic about a new Indiana Jones, thinking it was going to be one of two things. It was going to be another kind of Crystal Skull, crazy, plot nonsensical thing, or it was just going to be a rehash of old Indy, de-aged, and it was just going to be kind of another of the same adventures. That said, should we get into what we thought our ratings were and then go into a little bit of why? I felt this was actually a very good movie.
Okay.
But I'll tell you the but after I say why it's a good movie. I think that, of course, it was John Williams, right, as the composer.
Great.
Great music. I thought that the opening scene captured what we all loved about Indiana Jones. Yes, we had
Great.
the Nazis again. I thought the train scene where the train was going around the bend and the gun was stuck in the firing position was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I thought that was fantastic, Michael Bay-ish sequence. I thought that was super cool. And I thought the entire adventure that Indy goes on in terms of the caves and, looking for this artifact, I thought that was very true to the Indiana Jones that we all knew and loved, with the Stetson and with the leather jacket and with the whip and with the man purse and all those things. I thought it was, for someone who's an Indiana Jones fan, I thought this was a very true and faithful sequel to it. I thought the plot was relatively easy to follow. It didn't go too berserk. I was absolutely fine with it. I think it's a very, very good movie from A to Z, from the production to the special effects to the music to the props especially to make it look like it did in late 60s, early 70s.
That's right.
Fantastic, from clothing to the parade to cars. But I thought it was I felt like it was empty calories, in the sense that I don't remember laughing at all. Maybe the only joke I found kind of funny was the Eels, which I thought was a pretty clever take on his fear of snakes. Apart from that, I didn't laugh. And at the end, and that, Pete, I tear up, if not outright cry, at almost every movie. I felt nothing at the end of this one. I felt like the ending was completely unemotional and fell flat. And for that reason, I think that it was a very good movie, but not timeless. But for someone who's an Indiana Jones fan, they'll walk out of the cinema kind of getting the Indiana Jones experience. That's my take. How about you?
So I'm with you mostly.
Okay.
I would say that I 100% agree. This felt like an authentic Indiana Jones movie.
Yep.
For 80% of the film.
Yeah.
I really think that if you've never seen an Indiana Jones movie,
Yeah.
someone who's in their early 20s, mid 20s, you've
Right.
never seen a single Indiana Jones movie.
Yep.
If you want to understand what an Indiana Jones movie is mostly meant to feel like, this is it. In the
I agree.
franchise, I think outside of the franchise, we didn't mention it last week, but I think there are a couple other movies that do an even better job. For example, I think National Treasure 1 and 2 were excellent. And I'm not saying this because I'm a Nicolas Cage stan, but they were both excellent.
Surprise.
But they were both excellent Indiana Jones movies without being Indiana Jones movies.
Yep.
So in any case, so I think that were it not for the third act, I would say this is a must-watch in cinema. But I think the movie stumbled at the finish line. That last act kind of let it down from, I don't want to say greatness, but certainly from being considered tied for second, a close third in the franchise.
What didn't you like about, when do you think the third act began, and what didn't you like about it?
It's funny you mentioned that because I was thinking about it this afternoon.
Right.
I think the third act for me begins at the point where Mads Mikkelsen's character is able to steal and assemble the dial.
Okay.
And when he goes off basically onto his plane journey, that's when I think the third act starts. It's probably a little earlier in a technical basis.
So when they're kind of like driving down or taxiing the runway in the rain, and Indy is captured, Indy is shot, he is kidnapped and taken on the plane. Not entirely clear why, but they do take him. So Helena is chasing on a motorcycle and, grabs onto the landing gear and pulls herself in. You think that is when the third act begins?
Yeah, or pretty much basically at the time where Indiana Jones gets shot in the cave tomb, rather.
I have to say, I kind of liked the idea of the coordinates, right? Where they called it like a fission. I liked the idea of that fission, and I thought the effects were very good. And I liked that they went back and they were in Syracuse and they saw Archimedes. I was okay with that, like as a plot device. I just felt that the emotion of it fell very flat. Like I didn't feel any emotion towards it.
And I think I know why.
Tell me why.
I think it's because as a real life figure with a pseudo mythological element, Archimedes is nowhere near the same as Jesus Christ, or as Moses, or as Shiva. When we talked about it last week, first of all, can I just say, I rarely pat myself on the back. This time last week, I suggested an interesting artifact would be the Spear of Destiny, which they had here, the Holy Lance.
They did have it.
It was the MacGuffin at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I totally called this last week.
That's true. I don't think Archimedes fell flat because he's not a known enough historical figure, because I think that's also tough. Like if you bring in someone who's too historically significant, it's tough to impersonate them. Like Archimedes, for example, I don't know what he looks like, so I could believe that's Archimedes. I think the problem was that, and this isn't only an episode problem, it's probably a historical problem. If they would have set up Indiana Jones for the first 4 films, that his, for example, thesis or his doctorate or his idol was Archimedes, and everything about Indiana would have been Archimedes, and now he would have met like the one guy that he studied so much about historically, it would have felt like a better moment. In this film, we just see him kind of half-assing a lecture at the beginning of the film. Only one person's paying attention who's not even a student. It's Helena. We don't really feel that Harrison Ford, we know that he's an adventurer. We don't really know that he's this passionate historian. And I think it would have meant something more if he would have been taken back to this time, and it would have been like really a gripping experience for him. it wasn't. And also, it's a little bit random that that's where they were taken to. I mean, they got those coordinates like dramatically wrong. They were supposed to go back to like 1945 and they went back like 2000 years, right? So it doesn't really, it would have been more meaningful if they would have had like a different fissure that they would have gone to, I think.
I also think it's hilarious that in the fifth movie, he's like, no, this thing belongs in a museum. Yeah, dude.
He's
you've
been stealing stuff yeah,
across generations, right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
like, I think it's a bit of a bitter pill to swallow for someone like him to say that. Like,
Yeah.
I could believe that if Toby Jones had said that, or if his boss at the university had said that. But for him to be the one who's like, this belongs in a museum, it's a cultural artifact, it comes a little rich considering his opening scene in the franchise. He's basically stealing an idol for the university.
Yeah. So I hear you on the third act. I think the third act did fall a little bit flat, although I like the idea. I just felt like the emotion was absolutely not there for me. Like going back to that time period, it didn't have any significance for me whatsoever.
Okay, so let's take a step back. I very much agree with you because I think that it was bereft of any emotion. So like that ending sequence left a lot to be desired. But let's start about the watching experience first. How did you watch it? Where did you watch
Thank you for asking. That is a leading question, but I appreciate it nevertheless.
it?
I saw it in Dubai, and as listeners will know, Dubai often opens on Wednesday nights, a full 24 hours before you're able to watch it in London or in India, Pete. So I did see it on a Wednesday night, and I caught a midnight showing. So that means I got home at about 3 a.m., demonstrating once again my dedication to the films and stuff community.
Awesome.
I think 2 weeks ago, I saw The Flash in the biggest screen in the Middle East.
Right.
Right. And I said that it's approximately the size of 2 tennis courts. And I just sat in the general seating area, and there's still like very good seats. They recline and so forth. Apparently, there is something called the director's box, and it is up like 2 stories. So you're kind of like more at eye level with the screen. So I booked that. It is a phenomenal experience. One, you really get to take in the size of the screen. And I feel like I'm closer somehow to the sound bars because I was shocked at how loud this entire movie was. And 2, the seats are even more plush and they're grouped in 2s. So they're also very, very private. But I have to say, there were a lot of very passionate people up there. Like you can tell, I don't know if they've all got a podcast or if they're independent film critics, but you could tell there were a shocking number of individuals in the director's level for this. I thought my cinematic experience was exceptional. And although it's a little bit inconvenient to get to, I may have to see every film in that experience. It was so good. It was really good, except for maybe Oppenheimer on IMAX, but this was a very, very good experience, I have to say.
Yeah. I saw it on Thursday.
Okay.
I saw it on an IMAX screen.
Yeah.
And I generally think that is how you should be watching this movie. Yeah. I think that whatever my score is, it's irrelevant. This movie was kind of designed for not just a big screen experience, but like a massive screen experience. Yeah. Lots of action, lots of fun beats, you know, some humor, which may or may not land with you like it didn't for Ethan, but still there are definitely elements that you will appreciate more with a really kick-ass sound system and a really big-ass screen.
I agree. I have to say, I give this movie a lot of credit for the action sequences. I mean, Indiana Jones has always toyed that line, which is a little bit delicate, where he doesn't like guns. He's not really a fighter. He's able to punch, and he's often punched, and he gets into a lot of scraps, but he's not really known as
a shoot 'em up guy.
Yeah, exactly. I thought this film walked a authentic tightrope in terms of letting Indiana be a little bit of a hero and an action star, but at the same time, he never picks up a machine gun and starts like firing off on people, right? You've got the opening train scene, which again, I thought that was a great scene. And then of course you have the scene where they're driving, is it Morocco or Algiers?
Tangiers, yeah, in Morocco.
With the tuk-tuks.
Yeah.
Okay, you and I have both driven tuk-tuks. We know that tuk-tuks do not have that level of speed
or agility.
The handling on those tuk-tuks is nothing like in reality.
I think you could have probably beaten Vin Diesel in Fast and the Furious with these tuk-tuk, right?
I agree. You actually almost wondered, are we in Rome in the opening scene of Fast 10? Or is this a tuk-tuk in Tangier? And if you've ever been, you know that there is gridlock. But again, that's every action movie. Somehow the streets are always like clean. But I thought the action sequences were okay.
Going back to the train sequence, I mean, we're bearing the lead here.
Yeah.
What did you think of a young Harrison Ford de-aged?
I thought it was actually pretty good.
Yeah, so I thought, first of all, it looked pretty dang good.
Yeah.
Given that we saw the trailers, I thought this was going to be like a short flashback.
Yeah.
But it was actually quite a significant amount of time that we get to see a young Harrison Ford, right? Like this DH technology. And probably the most action I've seen for anyone who's been de-aged before.
I fully agree. I had a few things I was thinking about during this. My first thought was this actually old footage that they've reused? First of all, it was very Indiana Jones authentic.
Yeah.
And I agree. I mean, he looked pretty, like it was very, very good de-aging to the extent that you're wondering what's going to happen with all movie stars going forward. This was pretty good. I think two things probably helped it out. One, a lot of it is kind of dark and shadowy.
Yes.
And two, there is a lot of fighting. So even though it's probably 20 minutes where a de-aged Indiana Jones is appearing on screen, the amount of time that you actually see head on his face is kind of low.
So I would agree with you. I think there's two elements further. So one, the longer the action sequence got, though, the more it was a little bit jarring. The second thing was there's that sequence towards the end of the fight where he's running on top of a train, right? And you see him running on top of the cars before he finds Toby Jones.
Yeah.
That looked a little computer animated-y. I'm not saying it was, but it just, there was something about it that made me feel like, okay, I think there's a little bit of CGI work at play here.
Yeah.
But props to these guys because one, I'm pretty sure what they did was they used a body double that wasn't Harrison Ford. I think they used a young man, which is unlike what Martin Scorsese did for The Irishman. Because in The Irishman, you see a de-aged De Niro.
But that looked horrible.
But not only did that look horrible, even if you liked what they did with his face, which I didn't.
Yeah.
But even if you liked that, I mean, they showed a young De Niro throwing punches and running and being physical, but it was old De Niro. So it was like a guy who's supposed to be in his 40s, but he was moving like he's in his 80s. And you're just like, oh, dude, like I'm in my 40s and I'm telling you, even I don't look that crooked when I'm throwing a punch.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And then I was reading.
Can we just make one more side note?
Yeah.
They didn't just de-age Harrison Ford. They de-aged Mads Mikkelsen as well.
They did.
He looked very, very authentic, I thought, right?
For a second, I wasn't sure if they de-aged him at all. I thought it was just like, wow, okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah. He's using a lot of face cream at night.
Yeah. That sequence where he's hung up by his neck and the bomb comes through the floor and you can see the moonlight shade his face.
Yeah.
I thought that was where I was going to be like, oh, this is going to look awful. But that's actually where he looked the best. I was unbelievably impressed with how good that looked.
Not just that, but actually it was so good. I kind of forgot about it after a while.
Right.
At the beginning, I was like, you know how it's like someone's got like a blemish or something on their face and you can't like stop looking at it? At first, I was just like only looking at his face.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't stop looking at, like I wasn't even aware of what was happening in the rest of the movie. By the end of that scene, I had actually just accepted him as
A young
young
man.
Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
And that's why I was thinking, like, is this old footage? Like, it looks very, very good. So bravo, honestly, in terms of why this movie cost 300 million, which we asked that question last week.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why, is that the supercomputer that they're using to de-age them is ultra expensive, which is...
That's one of the reasons why, especially the first act, but in general, the first and second act,
Yeah.
made me really enjoy this movie. Initially, it was because it was so nostalgic to not just
Yeah.
see a young Indiana Jones,
Yeah.
but then going back to the comment you made before I rudely cut you off, the horse sequence, right? Like that, it was a
Yeah.
bit weird, don't get me wrong. But so, first of all, did you notice that this movie had every kind of chase? There was a foot chase, a car chase,
So motorcycle,
a chase,
train,
a train,
a boat,
plane, a boat, a horse. I mean, every form of transport, there was
True.
some kind of chase
Tuk-tuks.
involved with it.
Yeah. I thought if there was a plot weakness to this,
Yeah,
that would go something like, okay, Mads Mikkelsen, a former Nazi, is dedicated to only finding this dial of destiny, right? There's two pieces. He doesn't have either of them. Then I'm asked to take this huge mental jump where he somehow takes on a new identity as an American who's a professor at the University of Alabama, who's inventing rocket ships for NASA. And he's kind of got some goons working for him, but it's kind of sanctioned. And one's this huge guy who in real life is Dutch, and one's kind of like a German Nazi guy. And then there's like a black woman.
CIA agent.
If we were being a little bit tougher on it, we'd say, like, what in the hell is going on? That does not make any sense at all, how they put that together. And hold on, why just now are they looking for Indiana Jones? Why haven't they been doing this, like, for the past 20 years, right? Doesn't make any sense at all. I have to say, that's, as plot weaknesses go, that's a very big, I think, contrivance that you're asking the audience to buy into.
So I kind of appreciated what they did was, again, another indie formula, right? So when you think of that, you have the main bad guy / villain who's somehow tangentially related to the Nazis, which we saw.
Yep.
Then you have a semi sidekick / henchman who's the smart guy or who's the more capable guy who's got actual lines in the movie. That was Boyd Holbrook's character.
Yeah.
Then you've got the second sub henchman who's like hench in the sense that he's like 8 foot tall and as big as a barn, right? We saw that with the German engineer in the first movie, right? Not the engineer, the mechanic who gets cut off by the propellers of the plane.
Yeah.
You get the Indian guy who's actually wasn't Indian. I think he was a white guy in blackface or brownface in Temple of Doom. Who was also like this 7 foot guy who was like punching up and beating up Indy. So it was like a nice return to that formula.
Yeah.
And then again, in terms of formula, you see this movie's version of Short Round in Teddy Kumar, right? The little kid that's with Helena.
Oh, I've got some comments there. Yep.
I mean, we might as well get to it before we'll come back to the point that I want to make, but I was not a fan.
Disliked dramatically, unnecessary to have him in the entire movie, and the nonsense about how he was in the bar pretending to fly some plane, comes back and that's how he learned to fly a plane. Very dislikable character, probably a good actor, maybe a good person, certainly an annoying character.
I couldn't stand him.
Yeah, not sympathetic at all. Should we then dive into Phoebe Waller-Bridge?
Yes, we should. Wombat.
Helena. My sense is that I would have probably preferred Helena to be cast by Jodie Comer.
Yeah.
I think she would have played that role better. But I do like Phoebe Waller-Bridge quite a bit because I think that Jodie Comer plays the I don't care, I'm the smartest person in the room, I do what I do. I think she pulls that attitude off better than Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, if you watch Fleabag, which is a brilliant show that she's written and starred in, She plays a little bit more of a understated type of humor, a little bit more self-depreciating type humor. She is not playing, I'm the smartest, I'm the best person in the room type of person. And I found that her character in Indiana Jones didn't really play to her strengths that I saw her as an actress. Her character was a little bit too rough around the edges. Like, either she's dedicated her life to advancing her father's passion, or she's just an egomaniacal person who only cares about money. She can't be both. And they tried to kind of put her a little bit in the middle, where one, she's kind of this ruthless, I don't care, I steal and I sell, I've got gambling debts, I owe people money, I had a fiance, he was in the mafia, I dumped him. She was trying to combine all of these different character attributes, and I found it was too much. For Phoebe Waller-Bridge, she would have been fantastic to Harrison Ford as a self-depreciating daughter of his late friend. She would have been great saying, I really am passionate about furthering my father's, vision. I need you to help me do it. I'm really, really well educated on this topic. And then she's a little bit clumsy and inept, whereas Harrison and, Indiana Jones is always like the suave character, always knows the right thing to say, always is able to sweet talk himself out of the situations. She's the clumsy one getting them into these problems, right?
Let me add something to that, because I think you're exactly right. I think you've put in words what bothered me about her character.
Yeah.
So I didn't like the fact that she basically hung Indy out to dry, right? She basically put him in a position where she got his colleagues murdered. She was happy to have him framed for their murder.
Right.
And it just seemed a little odd that she was basically then blaming him for not being there for her bad life choices.
It didn't make sense at all. I agree.
Let me propose an alternative for you.
Yeah.
What if she were, exactly as you said, a little self-deprecating, a little bit academic, a little bookish, but she needed money to further her father's research, wasn't able to get it through official channels, so resorted to using her dad's notes to help her steal antiquities and sell them. And that's how she got in trouble with the mob.
Yeah.
And that's why she went to Indiana Jones, to get his help, to get her out of it. And then they get chased together.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't think of that plot device, but I think that would have been much more effective. We've seen this so many different times. You cannot be both a bad guy and a good guy. You can do bad things, but they have to be for good reasons.
Yes.
Right? So she can't say things like, hey, capitalism, my dad was so passionate about this thing. I know that it was his whole life, but I'm just going to sell it to the highest bidder. I don't care. Like that does not make sense on a human level, right?
Yeah. And I think at some point, even Indiana Jones calls her out on it. She's like, this is your dad went crazy over this device, right? Like he dedicated his life for this device.
Yeah.
And you're just going to throw it away by selling it for $160,000 or whatever it was.
Yeah. That whole relationship, if there was a writer's room, I would have said like, hey, I think we need to go back to the drawing board. Because even kind of the scene with Indy where he was at her house when she was like 12 years old.
Yeah.
Even that scene, honestly, wasn't really like a compelling scene. He didn't seem to be going crazy. Like he could have been, Indy was like, oh, he keeps writing me all these letters and he's going on and on about it. He didn't seem to be like unhinged. It would have been different if he would have been like spending all this money and keeps going back to the scene and trying to find it, piece it together, and he bankrupts the family, or he loses his tenure, right? Or he dies, like penniless because he's just obsessed with trying to find this thing. That's okay, I guess. And she can be like, look, I really resent my dad, or I know how important this was to my dad. I believe in him. I'm not going to let his name be, forever tarnished by the fact that he was a failure or he was chasing this crazy theory. I'm going to prove that he was right.
Right.
That's a more believable kind of motivation for her.
And you know what? I don't care if that's a trope we've seen in countless other movies and in other shows. It's a trope
believable.
because it works. It's something that you can get behind. I couldn't get
Yeah.
behind her as a character until the third act. Don't get me wrong. I liked that she was quippy.
Yeah.
I liked that she was able to verbally spar with Indy.
And that's her Fleabag character. Yeah.
And that's fine because she became
Yes.
kind of like the analog to Marion in the first movie.
Yes.
So I get that that's what they wanted to do, and that totally works. I think
Yeah.
that it's just that it seemed a little untenable that after everything she's done to him, the way she's done it, and then after all the nasty, like really nasty
Yeah.
things she says to him,
Yeah.
there's no redemption arc for her
No.
at that point.
She's also a little bit like disrespectful to him at the same
Yeah.
time. It would have been so much better if she would have been, look, I'm really furthering my father's legacy. I know that you're the only person who can help with this, right? And she comes to him and like says, look, like now you're retired, you've got nothing to do. Come on. You know, then we see Mason and Weber, whoever else these other guys are, right? In Mads Mikkelsen's group, right?
Yeah.
Then they come after them. And I think the better way to come after them is that they were onto the trail of Helena. They weren't on the trail of Harrison Ford, because otherwise, why didn't they come to New York, and why haven't they tried to, you know, get Harrison Ford for the past 10 or 15 years? It doesn't make any sense why they just came now. There's no good reason for them to be in New York on this date for the parade. And then they go in and they start shooting people, and it's not nice.
I get that they're chasing after her, but it seems a bit contrived, and I agree.
Then we could have a more emotional third act.
Yes.
Right? And that's what I really felt was, I didn't find that Harrison Ford's old, so I agree he's not going to have the same like humor that he has before. He had the get off my train line. We have the why does it have to be eels? Apart from that, a few little quips from Helena. That's it. But the third act is where we should have been crying. We should have been crying that Indy wants to stay back. And Helena is the one who like talks him out of it and says, you cannot. You will disrupt history. You cannot. You have to come back.
It didn't land for me. That emotional scene didn't land for me because of the way she behaved throughout the entire first half of this movie.
I cry at every movie, even Minions. Nothing here.
Speaking of bad guys, let's talk about the bad guy crew, right? What did you feel of Mads Mikkelsen?
Fantastic, right?
I liked him. Again, going with that same formula where you have the main villain, the sidekick, and then the sub-sidekick or the sub-henchman. I liked Mads Mikkelsen, although I thought he was a little meh. I don't think he was on the same league as, for example, the Nazi colonel in the third movie, or even as the German scientist in the first movie. We know he wants to go back in time and kill Hitler, but only because he wants to take his place.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like a half-baked plan, as it were. Like he doesn't really talk much more about it.
Yeah. It would have been better if he wouldn't have said what his plan was. He just wanted the control for the idea of the control, and he could go back to any point in time or any fissure.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be so specific.
I didn't think he was super memorable as a foil against Indy.
Yeah.
I did not like Boyd Holbrook's character. I just thought he was a generic bad guy who's only in it to be evil. Like he's shooting people indiscriminately. He's not smart, is what I'm saying. And like, if you look at it that way, for example, in the first movie, you had Belloc, right? The competing archaeologist.
Yeah.
In the sense that he was one step ahead of Indiana Jones. He was helping him. He was adding value to the Germans because he was actually capable. Here, he was just a generic henchman.
But what do you think of Mason? I think that was just a confusing, the whole idea just doesn't really make sense if you talk through it. My understanding at a very high cinema superficial level is that Mads Mikkelsen is such a brilliant physicist that he's designed a rocket for NASA, that he's leveraged his brilliance to say, oh, by the way, I need kind of a favor. Give me some muscle. I have my own kind of like side thing that I want to do for revenge. And the government's kind of like, well, you're a brilliant rocket designer. So sure, take Mason, who's a black CIA agent in the 70s who will never stick out. That's fine. And whatever you're going to do, just do it off the books. That's kind of the implication.
Yes.
And that is like a nonsense
100%.
plot. The idea to link him to NASA is just unnecessary.
No, and if you want to, you could have done it in another way, which is like he's changed his identity. He's in hiding.
Yeah.
He's trying to convince NASA that he's got plans in his mind for the second stage, but he wants to go after this device because it'll help him build a new, bigger rocket. And
That's
then
better.
he, he basically double crosses them and kills her. That makes sense to me.
That's better. I agree. That's better. But the way that it was now, it was just weird. It didn't really make sense. It wasn't believable. In the idea of Indiana Jones, we kind of got past it. But I have to say, like, that whole contrivance, it was really a weak plot point for me.
Yeah, I just wasn't a fan. And like, she felt bad that people were dying and all that. Yeah, you didn't look too sad about the fact that 3 innocent civilians were killed under your watch.
I just don't know why it took so long in movie time or in real life time in the plot, why it took so long for them to get to Indiana Jones. They were fighting on the train in the 40s, right? In the early 40s. And obviously Mads didn't know who Indiana Jones was and didn't know who Toby was, right?
Yeah.
He thought the clock fell in the water maybe, or these two guys took it. That's all he knew, right?
Yeah.
So he just moved to America. And somehow he tracked it down from Indiana. Doesn't make sense. Indiana, no one knew Indiana had it. It wasn't officially registered in the logs. He took it from Toby Jones in London or in Oxford.
Oxford, yeah. No, but they did clarify that because he makes a comment to Helena and says, we had a deal. The implication was she knew that the dial existed with Indiana Jones and that she was going to get it from him and sell it to her.
But how did Mads Mikkelsen know that?
He didn't. He was following her because she had already double-crossed her.
Is that right?
That's the implication, and that's what I took away from it.
She double-crossed him.
Yeah.
Then if that's really the case, that's a much better plot, I think, that they could have put in, right?
I agree. I think that they tried to gloss over a few of the plot holes with like a simple line of dialogue.
Yeah.
But the problem was if I remember correctly, don't hold me to this, that line was said on the boat after they got the Graphicos and before she blew it up with the stick of dynamite.
Yeah.
That's a lot of action to go around what would inevitably be a line that would smooth over a plot hole.
I mean, that's a pretty big MacGuffin as well, right? We never really talked about why they needed to go.
We should talk about the MacGuffin because I have lots of thoughts on that as well.
All right.
So, the premise of the movie, again, if you've seen this movie, you know what it is. But just in case you've already forgotten in the day since you've watched this movie, the premise is Toby Jones's character has always believed that Archimedes had built this device that was like years ahead of its time, or maybe even like thousands of years ahead of its time.
Yep.
And he figures out through his research and in the process of going mad that this device can theoretically either predict time or has something to do with time. He doesn't know what, because he doesn't have the whole thing. And in the prologue of the movie, they steal the first part from Mads Mikkelsen's character. They don't know where the second part of the dial is. Mm-hmm. We learn that the second part of the dial is unveiled by finding the Graphicos, which is basically a map that Archimedes made that would tell you where the second part of the dial is.
Hold on. Can we call a timeout?
Yeah.
So Archimedes designed this device. He's like, hey, this is more powerful than I anticipated. No one can get it. And like everybody, instead of just destroying it, he's like, I'll just break.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll just put it in 2 pieces, right?
Yeah.
One piece somehow was found. And then there was a map for where the second part is.
Yeah. And up to this point, this feels like classic Indiana Jones.
It does.
You have to find a map. The map will then give you a clue, and that clue is obviously a riddle, and that riddle will lead you to some kind of tomb, and that tomb will either give you the device you're looking for, or it'll lead you to another path to get the device.
Where was the second half, though? It was in his grave, right?
It was at his tomb where Archimedes was buried in Greece.
Did they know that's where his tomb was, or they needed that map to find his tomb?
They needed the graphicos to find it.
Did he create that map before he died?
Archimedes did, clearly.
And then he gave it to who? Who did he give the map to?
Well, that's the point, was that he didn't give the map to anyone. I think the idea was that the map was kind of there in the sense that if it was ever needed to be found, the two pieces together, the map would tell you how to get there. And the Roman centurions were trying to find it.
Okay, but he made the map, right?
Archimedes did, yeah.
And he made the map before he died. And he's like, hey, I just have to make sure that when I die, I'm holding the second half and I'm in the right place. Well, otherwise, the map is useless, right?
Exactly. Again, contrived, but this is like classic Indiana Jones stuff.
I agree, but just practically, that's how it went, right? He's like, hey, I'm going to put a map. The map is going to say, you can find the second piece where I'm buried.
Yep.
This is where I'm going to be buried. I just have to make sure that when I die, one, someone buries me in the right place. And two, I've got to trust that they also put this thing in my hand. Otherwise, the map that I made is useless, right?
Exactly right. And this harkens back to exactly the same thing with the staff and the medallion in the first movie to find the location of the Ark. It's exactly the same thing. You need a lot of things to go right in order to find the MacGuffin.
Fine. And then he gave the map to somebody, who knows who. And then the Roman centurions were transporting the map to try to find the second piece, but their ship sank. And how do we know that the map was on that ship?
So the way we know that is because Toby Jones, before he died, found out that there was that shipwreck where the first piece was found.
Right. I thought he said that there's an abnormally large number of Roman centurions on that ship,
100
right?
Roman centurions.
Yeah.
So the ship had 100 Roman centurions, the Graphicos, and the first piece.
Oh, and the first piece.
Exactly. And the Roman centurions were looking for the second piece. That's why they had the Graphicos.
Okay. So when the first piece was found, they didn't realize that the ship split in half. The second piece.
Exactly. Now you're on it. So, but again,
complicated, Archimedes.
A little complicated, a little contrived, but again, classic adventure, classic Indiana Jones. Yeah, no problem. The point is that once you assemble the MacGuffin, the Dial of Destiny, it basically acts as a compass and a timepiece, and it points the user to where this next fissure in time is going to be. Right. And then you can use that fissure in time after you enter the coordinates of where you want to go, right? Right. You can figure out that which is the fissure in time to go back to whatever time you want to go to. And that's what we see them do with the plane chase. And so they go on the plane. He changes clothes to become a Nazi officer again. And he gets on the plane to go back into that fissure. That's the premise of the MacGuffin. And that's what the MacGuffin is. Here's where I think the problem is. One, on paper, the MacGuffin sounds pretty okay. Like, I think that's a pretty cool conceit. But in terms of practical things, one, I wish that it was more of a religious bend to it, you know, kind of like the Holy Grail, the Ark, the Shiva stones. That's a personal preference. I just think that it would have been a little bit more exciting. But again, as an object to chase, it was fun. Okay. The second thing is that I was hoping or thought that maybe they could have found a mythological character or a historical figure that's maybe more recognizable than Archimedes. Like, I'm a math guy. I know who Archimedes is. I understand the two principles that he did, you know, the displacement and the lever. How much does your average person know about Archimedes to date? I'm less confident. I think it would have been, I'm not saying it would have been cooler. I'm not saying it would have been better. I'm just saying that I think it would have been more recognizable if, for example, it was a device that Leonardo da Vinci made or Galileo. It could have been like an astrolabe instead of a dial of destiny. It could have been astrolabe. Fine. But the main problem I have with this thing is that this thing is a compass, right? It tells you where to go for these fissures. We are now in the jet age in the 70s. Plane travel is normal. People are flying all over these places. Activating the dial doesn't actually activate the portal to open up to another time zone. Those things exist. This just points you to those fissures.
Right.
So in all the time that planes have been flying for the last like 40, 50 years, you're telling me no
it's
one has accidentally flown into a time zone? I wish that the dial actually, instead of just pointing you there, actually activated it and opened it up. Because, and this is, I'm being maybe a little childish, maybe I'm overthinking it, but like in terms of visual effects, all we saw the thing do was like move like a clock and like a compass, and that's it. I thought it would have been kind of so much cooler if you see that, you have to press the buttons when you get there for the fissure to actually open or something like that. Because in terms of it just as a pointing device, at some point, someone's going to accidentally fly into one of these fissures.
I hear you on that.
That's my feeling. I thought that's fine. I thought that overall, as a MacGuffin, it felt more like an Indiana Jones thing than the Crystal Skull did in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Far and away.
Right?
Far and away.
This felt like there was an actual thing they were hunting, and that there were actual consequences. And in that movie, they didn't really, the consequences didn't feel so dire.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, the consequences felt dire because he went out of his way to say, I'm going back in time to replace Hitler. I don't know. That's how I felt about it. I think that if you're looking at the movie, I think overall, first act, classic Indiana Jones, especially the train sequence, and especially when the anti-aircraft gun at the beginning of the train. I thought that was so fabulous. Like, really, I've never thought of that. I thought that was wonderful that the whole mechanism get jammed and it starts killing their own people on the train as it goes around the bend.
And the bullets were very cool, the way that they did that.
Yeah.
I mean, those were Michael Bay-esque type bullets, right?
Totally.
Kind of like the orange flames around them or whatever. Totally. Like they were really zipping and making some cool sounds.
Yeah. And the parade chase, with the horse. Yep. Okay, it got a little silly with the subway scene. That's fine. The second act I also thought was very classic Indiana Jones. Now we're going to an exotic location, right? We're now in Tangier, Morocco. There's a chase sequence. And of course, the chase sequence involves pristine Moroccan streets. And
by the way, I made one comment in my notes that there was a scene where they drove the tuk-tuk down the stairs.
Yeah.
The camera was like shaking.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a very, very cool device as well. It's some really good camera work.
That felt classic, right? Like underwater sequence when they dive with Antonio Banderas, when they go down underneath. And then, of course, the line with the eels I thought was funny. I thought that was good. I thought that also felt very Indiana Jones-ish. Of course, I thought the most Indiana Jones-ish feeling was, when they actually explore the cave in Greece.
Yeah.
And they're covered in bugs. And then they get the room with all the methane and he figures out what he needs to do. I thought that was classic Indy.
Classic.
And I think that's where it stopped becoming classic Indy, and it just bordered on like insanity. An airplane chase with a kid who's never flown an actual airplane chasing down a German
with the pilot asleep.
With the pilot asleep next to him.
I mean, come on.
Entering a portal in the sky, which leads them to 3rd century BC Syracuse. The plane flying through so low, first of all. Why so low? That, triremes can fire arrows and catapult flying stones at it. I thought that was nonsensical.
I thought, also remember the kid landed.
Which is unbelievable.
One, come on, that kid cannot land a plane. 2, there is no runway for that plane. Come on.
And what is the pilot doing?
And then you turned it around and then you took off in the middle of a war in all this rocky. I mean, okay, it's Hollywood. I'm not going to get too bothered by it. I'm just going to throw this out there. There's a world where Indy actually stays on the plane and he throws Helena out with a parachute. And Indy's like, I've got to destroy this. He kills everyone. He goes through the portal. and he parachutes out and there's no way back. And he stays kind of with Archimedes. Or he stays, maybe not with Archimedes, but he stays, maybe let's say it's not 2,000 years in the past. Let's say it's more like ancient Egypt, right? He's an expert in that region. And he's like, look, I'm at home. I can live here. This is where I'm going to live out my time. And Helena's like, wow, he like saved himself. That's a more emotional ending for me, right? Is Indy sacrificing himself, but at the same time, being so happy, right? Because you see, like, he doesn't really fit in New York. You got the young neighbors playing music. We'll grind this to death if we go into all those details. Let's move on. We were happy with the movie. We believe that it's authentic to the Indiana Jones heritage. One last thing. What did you think of Marion reappearing at the end?
The reveal felt devoid of any emotion.
That's what I was going to say. Should it have been emotional? Do we love Marion that much?
The whole point was we opened the movie, we learned that he's getting divorced.
Yep.
In the middle of the movie, we see finally that Helena is starting to show some sympathy for Indiana Jones because he says that if he could go back in time, he would do everything in his power to stop his son from going to war because that would help not just keep him alive, but it would save his marriage. That emotional oomph right there. And then she comes back.
She came back weird, holding a bag of groceries. What are you doing? Oh, I'm making eggs. It was like too weird and casual how she showed up, you know?
And she says, are you back? As in, like, are you the Indy that I knew? Are you back? But the point was that it wasn't just Indy, right? Like, he goes out of his way to say that she was the one she pulled away from him as well.
Yeah, she couldn't get over her grief.
It felt like a cheap emotional cop-out that, look, they loved each other after all. They never didn't like each other. It was just this tragedy, and that this was his way of processing tragedy. This last adventure that he went on, he was able to process his grief. Maybe so, but that's a two-way street. It's not just his grief that he needed to process. She needed to do the same.
I couldn't feel emotional about it. One, I didn't feel like they had this everlasting, love that was so captivating on screen. The whole thing is not really that compelling to me.
I know this is a long shot, and I know that it wouldn't ever have worked. But hear me out. What if when he wakes up, he's in the same apartment, the camera pans, and we see Shia LaBeouf?
You know what? I'm going to rewrite this with your inspiration. I'm going back to my point where he pushes Helena out of the plane with a parachute. He takes out Mads. He jumps out and he's gone through the fissure and they think that he's gone, right? Helena and the weird kid have like a good cry. At the end, he saved our lives. He saved the world. We'll never see him again, right?
Oh, I know where you're going with this and I love it.
He's still got the dial of destiny. He finds another fissure and he goes back and he can either save Mutt or he can do something. And I'm totally with you that you go and at the end scene, it's like him and Marion, Shia LaBeouf, and they're all having dinner like a normal family.
He Captain America's himself.
Yep.
I love it. That's even better because then what happens is Helena goes back to his apartment to kind of settle his affairs. Yeah. She opens the door. Yeah. And there's Harrison Ford. There's Shia LaBeouf. And there's Karen Allen sitting there waiting for her and being like, what took you so long?
Yeah. Oh my God. I've got chills. I have goosebumps. I may cry. How is that not way better than this nonsense that we've got now?
And I'm telling you, like, I know that it's practically impossible because of all the stuff that's happened with Shia LaBeouf. If you can pull off George Clooney to come back, the worst Batman to come back in The Flash, and if you can do a movie with Ezra Miller, despite all the stuff that they've actually done, why the heck couldn't Disney have said, here's $1 million. You're going to be a good boy. You're going to come on to set on time. You're going to film a cameo sequence. You're going to be in and out in a couple of days at most.
Yeah.
You're going to not be in the press junket. We want this to be a surprise.
Yeah.
And guess what? This is your way back into Hollywood, buddy. How awesome would that have been?
Honestly, if you want me to cry at the end of a movie, that would have done it. That would have done it.
I don't know. I just think that would have been so interesting, so good, so whatever. But okay, practical purposes aside, I think, we live in the real world. We understand it's probably not feasible.
I just felt nothing in his little crappy apartment where Marion comes back holding a bag of groceries saying, hey, you didn't have any food in here. The whole thing just...
It felt too neatly wrapped for what was on the table.
Yeah, you're right. It would be unusual that Marion would just walk in no big deal with a bag of groceries and right, well, I'm back. Yeah, I haven't seen you, I haven't heard from you, but I heard you're on an adventure and I've just decided to come back and get groceries and I'll make you breakfast. No big deal, right?
Yeah.
Too clean. In any case, Indiana Jones, the 5th installment, The Dial of Destiny. Pete, I think we've got your rating, but let's hear it.
I think this is a wait for streaming, sadly. I think the action sequences are beautiful and super fun, especially in the first 2 acts. I don't think you're going to regret watching this in the cinema. And in fact, again, I think that's probably how it's meant to be watched. But it starts going so far off the rails in that 3rd act, it lacks that emotional oomph for, a movie which is theoretically the last Indiana Jones movie. Certainly the last we'll see with Harrison Ford. I didn't like that cheeky thing they did with his Stetson at the end on the clothesline. I think this is a wait for streaming.
Pete, I'm with you. I also think that it's a wait for streaming. The film is exceptionally well produced and filmed. The soundtrack is excellent. I think that Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a great Helena, but I think they miswrote the character that she had. If they're going to have this type of character in dialogue, I think it should be someone else someone else. Very solid effort for an Indiana Jones 5th installment. You won't be disappointed if you're an Indy fan. At the same time, it's kind of a forgettable movie. I don't think it's going to go down as an all-time classic. And for that reason, you can wait for streaming.
Indeed. And I think just as an aside, as a random aside, please note this is the 3rd and most likely last time Harrison Ford has played one of his own legacy characters in the last decade. And I think of the 3, of Blade Runner, of Star Wars, and of Indiana Jones, this is probably his best.
Absolutely.
I really think in terms of character, I think in terms of not just the emotional beats, but in terms of even the physical beats and, the action beats, this is probably the best that we've seen of Harrison Ford in the films that made him the most famous.
I totally agree. All right, Pete, I think we have dissected Dial of Destiny well enough. Appreciate your insights. Listeners, after you see it, tell us if you agree, disagree, what we got right, what we may not have gotten right.
Where do you rank Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you think I'm off my rocker? Do you think that it's the best movie in the franchise, the worst movie in the franchise? There's 5 of them now, so we can have a better ranking. Let us know. Reach out to us. Tweet at us at FNS Podcast. DM us on Instagram at Films and Stuff Podcast. Email us aloha@filmsandstuffpodcast.com, or like this video and leave a comment and subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. All of those things help us out 100%.
We appreciate it. And we will see you on next week's episode of Films and Stuff Podcast. I'm Ethan, and I'm here with Pete, and wish you guys a great week ahead.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.